The Deepening is the long-awaited second full-length album from Norwegian post-black metal band Vemod, and they could easily be confused with another band of the same name from the same area in Norway, but and especially because that band sort of ended right before this one started, and it was, there's a lot of reasons you could see similarities there, but they're two different bands. And this one is an early project from folks who are involved in bands like One Tail, One Head, and Mare, and Dievel nowadays. So, what that is, or what that was back in 2001, 2004, and whatnot, that was much more of the emergent new breed of atmospheric black metal, which was much more in tune with the advancements that people had introduced with post metal in general, and I would say post black metal in its various forms, where shoegaze and various other trends kind of uh, push people to experiment with burzum like textures more so, and exaggerate things like Ulver and whatnot. And we got bands like Drudk and whatnot out of that. So this is kind of that arena, that time, and they put out a couple of early tapes that were interesting in that style. And they had like a strong aesthetic from the start. These were obviously talented folks, but they didn't really yield what I would consider a strong and memorable result until 2011's Vinterilden, and that's another demo tape, and it came a lot later. But I think they were ready to put out a record at that point, and I think they had basically they had been playing in other bands beyond the false start of the early material. They'd worked up their skills, and they become kind of a what would have been considered a profound atmospheric black metal band at the time, usually labeled ambient or post black metal later on. And the three or four songs on that first album, Ventar Pastormin, however you'd pronounce that, I don't know a lick of Norwegian, but it was excess. That this was an era of excess, especially that time for atmospheric black metal and things that were just not black metal anymore. And I think it's really important provenance, because we don't have to consider Vemod a black metal band necessarily, but they're certainly related. They are post black metal in the sense that they kind of started out playing a form of atmospheric black metal that was quite repetitive and related to the old ways, but then they were fully doing their own thing by 2012, and it was long form pieces which were probably not going to be very substantial if you're a fan of their other bands. These aren't riff records they're putting out at this point. So I won't really do any song on this album justice with a 15-second clip, because it's the way they move throughout time. But maybe we'll get a guitar hook or something to sort of get a feeling for the tone of this new record. So the first and main note that I would make for this new record is that there are more points of interest along the way. They aren't just leaning into a groove or a floating moment for 10 minutes at a time and moving on slowly. They're sort of getting to these interesting hooks in these shoegaze and sort of depressive rock modes, almost to the point where they've been able to work in a lot more to say in terms of lyrics and melody otherwise. So there's a lot less silence. It's a much more active record than the last one. And, there aren't extended like dungeon or forest synth sounding pieces that last 15 minutes this time around. So they are quite long and involved pieces, but they're not exactly the type that don't feel substantial in hindsight. I did like that first record back in 2012, but this feels like it does feel like it's been a decade, and they've learned quite a bit, and they haven't watered down the result. They've probably thought about it for at least some years. So if I had, I guess if I had one criticism, it would be that sometimes there are points where it just feels overstated, and that's more of a criticism of this type of atmospheric or post black metal related music, where they find a very novel movement or a type of piece, and they kind of bury it over time. And although I liked the way that this didn't feel like a sad record. It felt like more of a majestic nature enjoyer sort of record in a lot of ways. And I did appreciate that there were kind of shoegaze and things like that in there. It really relied on the deeper hooks found in some of these songs to get me to come back to it more than a few times. It did eventually grow on me. I'm actually a big fan of this record, more so than the last. These are surprisingly high scores for me for a post black metal record in 2024, and you won't see a lot of that. I think this is a very stylized and smartly presented record that is, maybe it's black metal adjacent if you want to argue that point, but I felt a pretty strong connection with it. I think it's a pretty memorable experience. It's quite catchy in a lot of in kind of a strange way, and that's probably more interest than anyone's gotten out of me in this style of music in a while, and that's down to my own taste or reaction to the record at the moment. So I don't know how long it'll last in terms of impressing me, but it did in the course of about 3 weeks. So take that into account and check it out yourself. Some of these songs are available to listen to now, and the full thing comes out on Friday, January 19th.